Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Mattis, president of the Jamestown Foundation, and thank you for agreeing to spend some of your time this morning with us. We have a great set of panelists, great moderator, and I couldn't think of a better way to discuss and to do it in the Jamestown way, discuss the conduct of the Ukraine war and the potential for victory and how to think about that victory going forward. Over the last 2.5 years, Russia has waged a brutal war against Ukraine. For many, Russia's war and victory seemed an inevitability, and for some, it may still be. And those doubts have plagued Western capitals and our willingness to provide support and provide aid to Ukraine's defense over the course of these last 2.5 years. And yet, it's worth looking at the damage that has been done to Russia by Vladimir Putin's war. The crime is up. Criminals who were recruited from prison are now back on the streets, and now with a deeper streak of cruelty that was picked up from the war in Ukraine. In some cases, veterans who are victims of Russia's grinding approach to the war have been left to fend for themselves, battling PTSD on the streets, and in some cases have turned to a life of crime. Alcoholism, a disease of social despair, continues to rise, feeding on itself in Russian society. And mobilization for the war effort looks more like press gangs and espionage than of a nation rallying to its country's cry. And now we even have North Koreans that are fighting and dying for Russia's war. Despite the infusion of cash into the defense industry, it is grinding down with shortages of machine tools and a lack of, at this point, now 500,000 skilled workers. And so no matter how much money the Kremlin keeps pumping into it, production continues to stagnate and grow at very modest amounts because there's nothing really that can be done to boost it. If there was any doubt about Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense, these should have been put to rest long ago. But we've seen the Russian Black Sea Fleet pushed off and made largely irrelevant. We have the Ukrainian offensive in Kursk that demonstrated that Kyiv is still capable of retaking the initiative and pushing the war onto Russian soil. And long-range strikes on Russian command posts, on oil refining capacity, demonstrate that Russia has had to create safe zones and push themselves further and further away from the front because Ukraine's demonstrated ability to strike. For us here in Washington and scattered around the West, our discussion must look forward. What are the acceptable conditions for peace, the acceptable conditions of Ukrainian victory? Having yet another frozen conflict would mortgage yet another country's future to Moscow's whims. But a genuine peace will also require Moscow to accept Ukraine's sovereignty and arguably the sovereignty of other former Soviet republics that are now independent. And today, I'm delighted to have this absolutely stellar lineup of individuals who can address this question and concerns from a range of different perspectives, from the battlefield to the halls of power in Kyiv and Moscow. So to introduce, I would like to start by introducing General Breedlove, who is not only one of Jamestown's board members, but he's a retired four-star U.S. Air Force general who completed a 39-year military career. He held 8 major commands across 4 continents during both peace and conflict, and culminated his distinguished career as commander of U.S. European Command and NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General Breedlove has extensive experience in the nation's senior-most geopolitical decision-making and policy-making process at both the Pentagon and the National Security Council. General Breedlove is currently a distinguished professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech, and one of our most thoughtful board members in looking at these issues of geostrategic consequence. I'm also delighted to introduce Iya Murmishvili to moderate our conversation today. She's the chief international correspondent at the Cipher Brief, and she is a former managing editor at Voice of America's Georgian Service, where she hosted the weekly news magazine The View from Washington. He is a frequent commentator and moderator in international discussions about U.S. foreign and national security policy, particularly with respect to the Caucasus and the broader Eurasian region. So without any further ado, over to you, Iya, to take it away.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for this opportunity and for the honor to moderate the discussion on this very important topic with this very distinguished panelists. So let me introduce the rest of our panelists and then go into the discussion. So we have Major General retired Volodymyr Havrilov, who was appointed as Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense in the course of Russian aggression at the beginning of 2022 and served in this position until October of 2023. Previously, he served as the defense attaché here in Washington from 2015 to 2018. So some of our viewers and participants of the workshop may actually know him from his experiences here. And he's also currently a director of the Veterans Dozen Foundation and serves as on the board of advisors of the U.S. Ukraine Foundation. And we also have Boris Bondarev, who's a former Russian diplomat who recently resigned from his position in opposition of Russia's war against Ukraine. So it's I have nothing but respect for you, Mr. Boris. He was born in Moscow and graduated from Moscow Institute of International Relations in 2002 and served in the Russian diplomatic service for over 20 years from 2002 to 2022. And his focus was on non-proliferation, strategic stability, and international security. He's currently a political immigrant, as you may imagine. Now, just very brief comments from me. I won't bore the audiences, but to set the tone for the discussion, I'll make a couple comments about what's happening in and around Ukraine. We'll focus on, of course, Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine and the conditions required for Ukraine to secure victory. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy presented his victory plan, as you know, at the UN in September and with various leaders, world leaders, including the United States, President Biden. And it was ahead of the Ramstein meeting, which initially got canceled due to the hurricane and President Biden's inability to travel to Germany. But now it's scheduled for October 18th. President Zelensky's plan emphasizes, even though we don't know the details of the plan, we can assume that emphasizes military strength and including advanced weapons and tightening sanctions against Russia, and allowing Ukraine, most importantly, to strike military targets deep inside Russia, which we have not seen any announcements yet, but we'll see if those are coming. And in the meantime, Russia is, of course, incurring very heavy losses on the front lines, but it's also intensifying its attacks on Ukrainian strategic infrastructure, including energy, in this period of wintertime and port facilities. So just to give one example, Ukrainian government has said that in the past 3 months, Russia has attacked Ukrainian ports 60 times. And these attacks have killed or wounded 79 people, damaging or destroying almost 300 port facilities and 22 civilian vessels. So that's the gravity and the extent of the attacks that we're seeing on Ukraine's infrastructure. Another major news that we need to mention, and this is the last thing I will say, is that NATO has proceeded with its annual nuclear drills called the Steadfast Noon in Northern Europe. It involves 60 aircraft from 13 nations, and it will be conducted out of 8 European bases. The Kremlin, which of course is using its nuclear coercion against the West almost weekly now, has accused NATO of stoking the tensions with Russia for proceeding with the drills. So those are all the comments I'll make about what we need to keep in mind throughout this discussion. I would also very much encourage our viewers to think about the questions, and we'll open up the chat for questions. I'll be monitoring them and would be happy to pose some of those to our panelists. And with that, General Breedlove, I will turn to you first. And ask you to give us this general outlook, basically, on where do you see the war today, and how important do you think is continued Western military support towards Ukraine for Ukraine to secure its victory?
Well, yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Jamestown for putting this on and letting some folks speak. I always learn something when I listen to General Haverloff speak, so I'm looking forward to that. First of all, I'm here in Vilnius, joining you from Vilnius, where I'm a part of an effort where the Lithuanians are looking hard at what they have to do to survive the first 8 to 10 days of war while NATO begins its response and its movement to response should and if and when Russia decides to try to make an incurrence in Lithuania again in the future. And I think the only point to make here is that it is very important that these smaller nations who don't have large troop formations in them, I think this is a very good movement to try to figure out how they can better fill their Article 3 requirements to prepare for their own defense. And so what we have done here during the time I've already been here is obviously learn a lot from what Ukraine has done in its fight against Russia in their invasion of Ukraine. And so we are thankful for the efforts of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Very quickly touched the sort of three on-the-ground hotspots. Most people on this Zoom are probably better informed than I am, but the fact of the matter is Kursk is drawing a lot of attention. Kursk, I think, is a masterstroke by the Ukrainians. And may I just be very critical of our own government? I think it was a masterstroke not to involve the U.S. in the planning and execution of Kursk, because the U.S., I think, would have tried to talk our Ukrainian brothers and sisters out of such an endeavor. And now I think we're going to reap some good benefits from what Ukraine has done. The reporting of what's going on the ground is very mixed, but most of what I see is very positive in that the Ukrainian forces are being attacked, but they're holding in most all of the regions or the directions that they're being attacked. And once again, we're beginning to see heavy Russian losses. A very popular view right now out there on the internet is almost an entire Russian formation being destroyed by essentially an ambush set by the Ukrainian forces. So this is going to be a difficult spot for Ukraine, but it is already proving to be extremely costly to Russia, not only in the messaging of it, but in their troops. In Donbass, as you mentioned, we still see a slow advance in Donbass. The losses there, again, are extreme. The reporting or the discussion I had with several individuals from there, they talk about Russian formations thinning, that what used to look like battalion level attacks now look like company level attacks. And company level attacks look more like platoon level attacks. And that the volume of the attacker is beginning to thin and sort of become an example of the losses and their trouble in replacing their losses in Donbass. So we still need to be concerned. And the great reporting out of the Ukrainians always talk about it being a difficult situation, but they are still causing the Russian forces to take extreme losses for the very small gains that they're making. You already mentioned what's going on in and around Odessa. I think we're going to have to start paying a whole lot more attention to the fact that Russia is attacking all these civilian ships. In my discussions, I have resurrected words that we used to use in the Cold War, because I think it's very much sort of describes clearly what Russia is doing right now. We used the terms counter value, meaning attacking civilian infrastructure, power production, industrial capability, shipping and things, civilian shipping. These are counter value targets. And we, during those years, started developing a military that would be able to strike counter force targets, having the ability to strike precisely and to destroy forces rather than civilians and civilian infrastructures. And what we see, I think we can clearly see that in the Donbass region, that Russia is unable to truly fight a counter force fight, and they are stuck in a counter value fight. And that is really causing a lot of disruption to our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. Quickly on to what you asked me to speak a little to. A path to victory. And to some of you who have heard me speak before, some of this is going to sound like a broken record because it hasn't changed in a while. The first thing I would say that is the first step to Ukrainian victory, in my mind, as a partner to them in this war, is that Ukraine needs a clear, declaratory, public announcement of U.S. and Western intent to support Ukraine through to victory over Russia and regaining all sovereign Ukrainian lands. I think it's very important. We've been playing patsy is in the words that we use in the West about how we describe. U.S. used to have horrible statements of policy that said, we're going to be there for as long as it takes, and we're going to give them everything they need. But we never said to do what. And I think it needs to be public so that Russia understands where the West and where the U.S. stands in its support for Ukraine. And that is to defeat of Russia and reclaiming Ukrainian lands. If we get that public, declaratory, positive statement, Mr. Putin understands where he is, and our allies understand where we are, so that they can better turn to their support for Ukraine. Second, based on that declared intent to defeat Russia, then we need to change our type and our level of support. It is my assertion that right now we are not giving Ukraine what they need to win. We are giving Ukraine what they need to not lose. And a lot of leaders in the West are hoping that then, as this war moves forward and the costs are so high to both sides, they'll go to the table and negotiate. Clear intent to win, clear intent to defeat Russia, change the level of support to a level that we would take if we were going to fight this war. Any example that you want to ask, well, what should we give Ukraine? Ask yourself, what would I take if a NATO or U.S. force was in Ukraine fighting this? And now you would understand how much air defense, how much long-range strike, how much air support we would be supplying. And so a clear change in level and type of U.S. support, fixing this war to a win and not a survive to negotiate stage. In the very short term, the first steps in this change in the delta of the war is, as you brought up, is a change in the policy of long-range strikes. And allowing those long-range strikes certainly to use Western kit. Every day, Russia is firing from nearly 300 degrees on the map and the compass rose into Ukraine using Iranian kit, using North Korean kit, and I am telling you, and I believe also using elements supplied by China. So Russia is using other national abilities and shooting from 300 degrees into Ukraine. And we are asking Ukraine to not be able to reply, and we're forbidding them from using our equipment. This is an undefensible position to take. And I think we would certainly never put that kind of limitation on a NATO force or a U.S. force. I think that Ukraine needs to be able to rely on a constant and adequate level of ammunition supply. We should not have commanders on the field, as they have multiple times in this war already, have to change their tactics because they are having to thin their use of ammunition because they are pending flow of ammunition from the outside. We should never force them into that situation. And then I would just tell you that we need to give Ukraine a more dense and fulsome ability to strike into Russia. We would not allow Russia to have this sanctuary where they can build, assemble, and get ready to forward forces into Ukraine. They should be attrited before they cross the boundaries of Ukraine, and they should know that their system is not reliable in attacking Ukraine. One of the simplest things about Russian logistics, it is extremely dependent on the rail system. We know how to eliminate rail supply. And so we need to help Ukraine have these capabilities. That is from longer range MLRS kinds of rounds, more F-16s with the capability to drop JDAM munitions precisely into things like rail yards, bridges, etc., and give Ukraine the ability to fight the war that we would fight if we were in there doing it for them. You mentioned this growing, I call it now the Russian coalition. We have North Koreans in Ukraine fighting for Russia. We have Iranian kit there fighting for Russia, and a growing Chinese piece of the puzzle as far as equipment and technology in there. What are the repercussions to these nations? What are the repercussions to North Korea, to Iran, and to China for aiding North Korea in this fight? I believe we need to be discussing that. And then before I draw this to a close, I think that we have to understand that coming soon is a shift in the road, possibly, as we look at the possibility of some negotiations. And what we clearly need to take to those negotiations is an attitude that we are not once again going to reward bad behavior by Russia. In 2008, the West's response to the invasion of Georgia was inadequate, and the West rewarded Russian bad behavior. In 2014, the West's response to the invasion and occupation of 12 to 13% of the most important commercial things like Mariupol in Ukraine, we allowed Russia to once again, for the second time, be rewarded for their bad behavior by holding that territory. And if we go now to a third negotiation and for a third time reward Russia for its bad behavior by giving them more Ukrainian land, then let me tell you, after raising children and helping to raise grandchildren, after rewarding bad behavior, and rewarding bad behavior, we are not going to get good behavior after Mr. Putin when he attacks the next time. So I think in closing, the most controversial thing I'll say is that I think we need to describe for Ukraine a clear, near-term path to NATO. And if we have to live in a model like we did with East Germany and West Germany when Russia was occupying East Germany, then we'll have to figure that out. But I think the long-term victory in Ukraine depends on NATO membership. I think I'll close there. I had one more point, but I've gone long. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll have opportunities to come back to some of those points, and please, General Breedlove, keep that in mind and share that point with us as well. And now I would like to turn to General Havrilov and ask him to, maybe not a very specific question in this case, to give you the opportunity for the opening remarks, but based on what General Breedlove just talked about, what's the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian outlook to all of this? And most importantly, how does Ukraine view the needs it has to get to victory and drive the Russian military out of its territory?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very grateful to General Breedlove for his great comments, strategic vision of the situation. From a Ukrainian perspective, our society is a key engine of this resistance. Civil society. The civil society is the core of the energy for our military, for our industry, for everything. And the behavior and the mood of the society determines the direction of the war and the results of this war. Of course, without support from our partners, from the United States, from Europe, no society can sustain that kind of war. But to beat Russia, we need high morale, high enthusiasm, and huge support from our people. And these things are here. And the general behavior and general mood in the Ukrainian society is no deals with Russia concerning our territories. And our politicians, they keep it in mind. So if we are talking about some kind of negotiations with Russia, it should be on the terms of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And the problem is for Russian regime, for Putin and his near entourage. They become hostages of the huge strategic mistake when they started to change the course of history in Ukraine by force. Say they underestimated the civil society in Ukraine, they underestimated many other things, and that's why they are now the hostages of the situation, and they don't know what to do. For them, any problem, any disaster for the military in Ukraine is disaster of the regime and the huge problems for the Russian as a country, as an empire. That's why they are trying to scramble all available resources in the country, to attract all possible partners, even from the gray zone, to achieve some kind of positive results in Ukraine and to press us, Ukrainians, to some kind of deals on the table and to present that case to the Russian population like some kind of victorious result of this special military operation. And that is the problem for Russia. So it's not a war about survival of Ukraine in 2024. In 2022, it was a war about our survival. Now it's a war about survival of Russia with the regime they have now in Moscow. That's the problem. And so our role of Ukrainians in this situation is just to fight using our resources, using our enthusiasm and motivation. At the same time, to see all possible ways how to save lives of our people, because we are not in terms of population like Russia, so we have to be more creative and more asymmetric and hybrid, not to allow to send our troops for slaughter like Russia can do it easy. That's why we should concentrate on three areas in this war, warfare, modern warfare. First of all, to be superior in the situational awareness, to know where the enemy is down to the soldier on the distances up to 200 kilometers. Second, to have all necessary instruments of precision strike capability to kill this enemy on these distances down to the soldier. And the third area is the force protection, to protect our troops, to protect our infrastructure against similar Russian attempts to destroy. And those are the areas we are just working in with our partners. And of course, the contribution in terms of technology, in terms of the modern weapon, of course, from our partners is very crucial. And I totally agree with General Breedlove that that kind of support for Ukraine should be very public on all political levels in Europe and the United States. And should be stressed every day that there is no way to reduce the support for Ukraine, even not in the short term, but maybe just as long as necessary, that kind of support is guaranteed. And because this war is moving to the war of economics. And economy in Russia is not the economy of the West. So they can't sustain this war. They can talk a lot. They can say, we have resources, we have support from somebody, we have people. All these propaganda tools they are trying to deploy now, they are limited. And they're the first time in the history, even the Russian Empire, that they're alone in the fight against that kind of coalition. Never been in the history of Russia, they were alone in the war with somebody. Every time they were in a kind of alliance or the union with somebody. For the first time, they're in the war, of course, not with the huge nation, with Ukraine, but they're alone. They're alone with sanctions, with a limited supply, with no Lend-Lease program like Soviet Union has in World War II from United States. So they have relied upon only their own resources and the mood of the population. And there is no civil society in Ukraine, in Russia. They have population which is just following the propaganda streams. And it's also a problem. It's also a problem. It means that we couldn't expect any kind of race of people in Russia just to move away the regime. No, it's a little bit different society. But they have a lot of weaknesses and we have to exploit. And our mission now just to have a technological superiority in this war, to use all asymmetric and hybrid things to compensate the superiority of Russian people and to give them clear message that there is no military solution for them in Ukraine. And of course, we will see what is going next, but I think the key problems for them become inside the country, in Russia. And we have to contribute to that so-called the stream of black swan events in Russia with our fighting on the front, killing the enemies on our territories as long as necessary, at the same time using the new technologies to save the lives of our people. That's in short.
Thank you very much, General Gavrilov, for your insights and thoughts. And you raise a very important topic that I think Mr. Bondarev would be the most well-suited to answer. Based on everything that we've talked about so far, whether it's assistance from the West and Ukrainians' ability to be more agile in some of the operations, particularly we saw it in Kursk incursion. It seems like pressure should be increasing inside Russia, and the population should be realizing that it's more than just a special military operation. We're dealing with the full-out hot war with a neighboring country. What's your view on how Russia and especially Russian population is reacting to it? And do you see any pressure increasing inside Moscow right now?
First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this webinar. And I would like to thank General Breedlove and General Gavrilov for their insights. And I find myself in full agreement with what General Breedlove says. Regarding to your question, well, as General Gavrilov just mentioned, Russian society is a little bit different from what you can find in Europe, in the United States, or even in Ukraine. This is very atomized society, so to speak. So it is very highly individualist. Unlike the common notions that Russians are very collectivist people, today it's totally different. Every Russian thinks mostly about himself and about his family. And all he wants from the government is to be left alone. So the majority of the Russian society is very apolitical, is very indifferent, and they try to distance themselves from whatever is transpiring in Iran. It is manifested in the way that if government wants the war, okay, they can have the war. But just we don't want to be bothered by this. It's not very highly moral, but it's what we see. So unless the average Russian feels the hurt posed by this war, he is quite, well, if not happy, but quite content with what he has. And the majority of the population is not affected by the war directly, or at least they do not see this logical connection between the war and the deterioration of the economy, so to speak. And now we see that Russian economy is experiencing some kind of economic boom, mostly artificial, because a lot of money is pumped into this military production. But yet a lot of people say that and see that nothing changes. Everything is okay, especially in major cities. Like if you visit Moscow, there is no signs of war. There are quite few these posters like just join the armed forces, sign the contracts at all. No, just normal, peaceful city with restaurants, with all entertainments on, and people living their average life. What about the entourage of Putin? There is no secret that they are not very content with the war itself. They were not, I think they were all caught off guard when Putin decided to invade Ukraine. But still, Putin succeeds in convincing all of his elites that this war will be eventually victorious, that Ukraine will be eventually conquered or subdued one way or another. And the West, what is the most important part of this? The West will have to acknowledge this new reality. The West will be humiliated. The West will acknowledge that the United States, first of all, that the United States has always been wrong. And the Putin must, and his newly Russian empire, whatever, must have its own exclusive sphere of influence where no other bloc or great power has the right to interfere. First of all, the United States. If we recall this notorious ultimatum of December 2021, those draft treaties of security guarantees between Russia and the United States and Russia and NATO, there are a lot of points about NATO infrastructure and all other limitations on NATO and US armed presence in Europe. But there is also the most important point is that the United States and NATO countries must take upon themselves an obligation not to interfere into domestic affairs of Russia, not to incite any popular protest or whatever. That's the main fear of Putin, because Putin believes that only protests that can happen in Russia can be only inspired by Western forces. Mm-hmm. And so his elite is maybe not very happy about the war. Mm-hmm. They have lost a lot. They are under sanctions, most of them, but not all of them. To this day, a lot of people from Putin's beneficiaries of his regime, can freely travel to Europe, even to the United States, and have their assets there. But he still says to them, be patient, some more months, maybe 1 year. The West is already failing. The West is already weakening. We see it because we don't know what will happen after the elections in the United States. Yes, the Europe is weak and there are no players. Germany says that they will not send any more heavy weapons to Ukraine. Chancellor Scholz is very, very unreliable partner in this regard. So Putin's people see that he may be eventually right. He was wrong when he started this war because nobody anticipated this such drastic sanctions and that the West would support Ukraine. But now they are hoping that the West will at the end fail. The West will say we cannot support Ukraine any longer. We have our own problems. We don't have enough resources. Blah blah blah. So okay, we wash our hands. That's what Putin is. What he counts on. And I must admit that this situation today looks more likely than it did look into 2022.
So there were arguments that the time was on Russia's side. Time was not on Russia's side as the war progressed for the past 2.5 years. But now you're saying that time is indeed on Russia's side.
It's complicated, of course.
Yeah. Just a quick note on the economy as we're talking about it. In April, IMF projected the Russian economy to grow by 3.2% this year, which sort of confirms what you said about this artificial economic boom that Russia has right now, mostly due to the war economy. And then on top of that, however, it's very strange to see this, that some 1,200 major companies, major firms have left Russia. About 2 million Russians have left the country, and some $350 billion of private money has left the country. But nonetheless, we're still seeing this economic situation that average Russians are not really feeling that they're at war. So I would like to go to General Havrilov and ask him, how do you explain this? Keeping in mind the sanctions, keeping in mind the departure of all this capital and brain drain that Russia has experienced, we're still seeing some of the innovations and development of Russian military capabilities. So how do you explain that? And what would you like to see to reverse that or prevent that?
First of all, Russia inherited the huge war machine from the Soviet Union. But was, of course, during the 90s, it was in degradation for some time until Putin took in the power, and then he started the reform of Russian military and industrial base just to be ready for something like we have now in Ukraine. At the same time, Russia is not the Soviet Union, so they don't have the resources which Soviet Union could concentrate from the republics, including Ukraine. That's one. First, second, they have centralized systems, so very limited initiative and innovations on the ground among small enterprises and other things. So yes, they still have some research institutions which also they inherited from the Soviet Union and which trying to contribute with some kind of creativity in this war. And we can see it with drones, with EW capabilities. Russia is doing well. At the same time, they're limited with a very fast, very quick evolution of military technologies, which is not possible given the structure of the society. In Ukraine, we have a little bit different situation. We have a lot of small enterprises and startups which is trying to contribute with everything, knowledge and ideas to the course of the war. That's why the evolution of our technology is very fast. It's much faster than Russia can afford. So we see a lot of copies of our approaches which Russia trying to do in their warfare in Ukraine. Concerning the economy, the country, Russia, economy been based on the natural resources for many years. It's a gas, oil, this market. So the key incomes for the industry, for the economy are this kind of industry. So yes, now they have a militarized economy. It means a lot of available resources being moved to the defense industry. Of course, it's also creates some jobs and other things, but we all know that the military economy is very limited. It's only just can be sustained for a certain period of time. Sooner or later, you have to face the truth. And so we'll see. But once again, we should keep in mind that the GDP, Russian GDP, is less than GDP of Texas or GDP of California. I'm not talking about Germany or France or another. So the economy and resources of the West much, much higher than Russia can even imagine. for themselves in the future. And so it's all about the political will in Western countries, how to concentrate the available resources in the right way and to give the Ukraine this push of technological superiority and to once again to demonstrate, to present Russian leadership that there is no military solution in Ukraine. And all this conversation about the weakness of West, about the advances in Ukraine, all things remind me the rhetoric of Hitler in 1944, 1945. All the same, the West is weakening, the United States in decline, so we will see that luck is and history is on our side, and we know the results of all this rhetoric. Because this rhetoric is used for propaganda theme, to keep the mood of the population on a certain level, to avoid, to mitigate any kind of protest movements inside the Russia. But the only medicine against this is everyday fighting, tough fighting with them on the ground, to make them feel losses, and to make the people in Russia understand that this war concerns everybody in the country, not only somebody who is on the front. It's about wounded, it's about PTSD guys, it's about the killed. Each family in Russia have to feel that. And after that, I think we will see a different picture, I hope.
Thank you very much for that, Dan. General Breedlove, I would like to come back to you now. Last week, Ukraine reported that either the Ukrainians or the Russians themselves shut down this mystery Russian drone that was apparently something that we did not know about much before. And now the Ukrainians are studying the debris to learn more about this. So what does that mean to you in keeping in mind all that we talked about now? What does that mean? Is Russian military as capable still as we think? Or do you think it's brittle and it's just smoke and mirrors at this point?
Well, thanks for the question. I think that there's two paths that we have to take on this particular event. We have to take it seriously. We have to look at what they have produced and see if there is new technology or new capability there. And frankly, I think we need to the degree that we can, look at the wreckage and determine how much of the technology is coming from other nations. Because all indications to the exterior is that Russia is struggling to produce these more capable platforms. They are relying on Iranian platforms, North Korean platforms to do most of the work in their country. And there doesn't seem to be an indication that they themselves are at this point leading in any technological ways as far as the battlefield. I would call one exception to the four, and that is both Ukraine and Russia are doing some incredible work with electronic warfare. And I think the West needs to wake up and pay attention to what they're doing, because I think we're lagging. We may have some of the best electronic warfare in the world, but we have not gotten it to the field in our forces. And we see Ukraine being very adept and Russia being a very adept at moving electronic warfare to the battlefield. We have seen indications that Russia is having a hard time getting the kind of chips and the kind of technology that they need to produce indigenous capabilities. So I would just say one more time, we need to take this event seriously, look at what's inside of it, help to determine what we think is the state of Russian innovation, because it seems to be missing now on the battlefield. They're relying on others. And I think that it's important we understand how this came about.
I would like to ask you to be brief with some of the questions that we still need to, I think, address for our audiences. And we do have questions coming in, so we have about 20 minutes left. So please be brief with your remarks. One thing that we have a couple questions coming in about Russia-China relations. So maybe we can ask that question, or maybe Mr. Bondarov, you could tell us, how do you see, or how Russian government views China at this point? There were some, every time you read something about Russia-China partnership, or this partnership or of convenience at the moment, you usually get the sense that Russia is a junior partner for China, and China is really benefiting from this war, and perhaps even the fact that Chinese never want this war to end because it weakens the West and weakens Russia. So what do you think the Russian outlook on this partnership with China is?
Well, first of all, it may seem that Russia is a junior partner to China, and China is greatly benefiting from the situation. And President Putin is doing the dirty work for Chinese now, and they use Russia as a cover, which they have been using for decades, especially in diplomacy, in the United Nations and all. But I believe, okay, it's my personal point of view, I believe that Moscow, President Putin himself and his people who are in charge of foreign policy, they do not see China as the senior partner, or they do not see their role to be subordinate to China forever in exchange of their continued support. No, I think their political thinking is quite simple. First, we deal with Ukraine and in position with the United States. Once we deal with them, once we settle this problem, we address the Chinese issue. We're still nuclear power, we're still great, big and all. We've just conquered the Western hegemonism or whatever. Now we can talk to Chinese as equals. So it's not that China may be like very, very calm about their friendship with President Putin or whoever holds the power in Russia. No, but today Putin has to use China, and Putin has to pay homage to Chinese, to President Xi, showing that they are best friends. But it's situational, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And Putin doesn't see himself to be a kind of a steward of China, kind of someone, I don't know, who's Chinese appoint to rule Russia on their behalf. No.
Mm. Thank you very much. Let's address the question of NATO very briefly as well. General Havrilov, let me ask you first this. So Black Sea is a very important strategic location, of course, for NATO. And in the recent months and years, we've been talking about Black Sea more and more. But now it's even more, the issue is even more prominent with Russia harassing the Black Sea neighbors, including Georgia. And Russia is, of course, building a deep sea port in Ochamchire, occupied Abkhazia, to maybe have a safe haven for its ships. As Ukrainians are driving the Russian Black Sea fleet out of their Crimean ports. Where do you see the Ukrainian war and Russia's constant harassment of Odessa in particular in terms of NATO's security? Do you think if Russia were to, God forbid, were to advance, you would like, I'll come back to you as well. What does that mean for NATO? Do you think attacking Odessa and Russia moving into Odessa, again, God forbid, will impact NATO's security in any way?
Well, Odessa and the Black Sea, all these items, they're part of this war, but the war about Ukraine, first of all. Of course, Russia is concentrated on Ukraine. It's not concentrated on NATO. So they are not just have any special plan to invade NATO or like that. There is some kind of rhetoric in the mass media about that. But nevertheless, number one purpose for them is Ukraine, the change of the... they think that there is a regime, a kind of political regime in Ukraine. They don't understand it's all about civil society. So they still trying to get some victorious achievements in this war. For NATO, the only country close to that area is Romania. Romania had spent a number of years in Romania as a defense attaché once and before the 2014. And I know how sensitive are Romanians to any kind of Russian movements in the area. They still have this gene history of their participation in the war with Soviet Union. That's why they see it not only from the NATO perspective, but also from the perspective of the nation, of the history of the people. Of course, for them, any kind of escalation in the area close to Odessa, to the routes of the supply, for maritime supply, of course, it's very sensitive. For NATO, Black Sea, of course, is an area of security concern. It's understandable, and there are key players for in this area from NATO countries. It's Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey. And of course, it's not about comparing the capability of Russia in this area, because they lost most of the capabilities during this war because of Ukrainian asymmetric warfare there. So, and now I think the key events we will see in nearest time concerning the, first of all, air defense issues for this area, just to exclude the Russian missiles to reach the port structure, the ships in this area. And also the next step, they will lose the air superiority in the area, given the new capabilities coming to Ukraine. And with the loss of the air superiority, the next step, they will lose the Black Sea. Because it doesn't matter how deep are the waters of the Ochamchira port. It doesn't matter who they are, because Black Sea is a very small area for any kind of fleet. So they are limited with rebuilding the capability because of the Montreux and other things. At the same time, they're defenseless in case of the air superiority from Ukraine. It's not easy to achieve, but we are on the way. It's only a matter of time Ukraine can rule the air in the Black Sea, because we have technologies coming to us. They're different from what Russia has. And Russia has a limited stock of aircraft. They can't sustain the tempo of recovery of the aircraft. So they lose the more than they can build. And that's always very important. And they're losing the best aircraft in the inventory. We have a permanent supply and future obligations for our partners to support new generation aircraft in this area. Of course, it's not, maybe it's earlier to think about that this year, in next 2-3 months, but 2025, in case Russia decided to move in 25 warfare, we will see a lot of dynamics in Black Sea. And for NATO, I think it will be kind of relief.
Yeah, and General Breedlove, I know that you wanted to say something about this.
This was the point I was skipped over earlier, and this ties to words we used to use to describe what we wanted for Ukraine, and we used to say when this is settled that we need a viable Ukraine. And I think it's important, and Volodymyr may correct me, but I think it's important that we leave Ukraine in a place where they have economic opportunity. And the two things we study in War College is security and rule of law. And so security in the northern Black Sea means that Odessa remains open to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And in my mind, that will always be challenged if the Russians are in Crimea. And so Crimea is an important part of the recovery of Ukrainian land so that we can assure that the Ukrainians can always use Odessa and possibly maybe Mariupol again once it's rebuilt. And that depends on the whole idea of Odessa. Thank you.
And General Breedlove, while you still have your mic on, there are a couple questions for you, but let me ask you this one. It's coming from Irina Matvichuk, and she's asking, are you familiar with the victory plan that President Zelensky presented to President Biden? And is it possible to, at some point, if it includes some sort of negotiations with Russia, the question is, do you think it's possible to force Russia to sit at the negotiations table at this point? And if so, how's that possible?
I don't think it's going to be possible to force them to come to the table, but I would expect that Russia is going to want to come to the table and present their idea of what peace looks like. And that, I believe, is going to be, as a minimum, holding on to all lands they currently have. And they may even make a demand on the remaining parts of the 4 oblasts in the east. So I think they will come to the table because they're going to want to feel like they're in a position of power and try to impose this on Ukraine. I go back to my very first point. It's incredibly important that the West makes a clear, declaratory, public announcement of what we are supporting Ukraine to do, so that Russia knows that staying in these portions of Ukraine is not on the table with the West. I think that's a harder problem to solve, to get the West to that point, than getting Russia to come to the table.
Yeah. General Havrilov, I see you nodding, or maybe it was the camera. Did you want to add something to that? Is it possible to bring Russia to negotiations table?
I'm a little bit skeptical about the Russians be ready to have part in the equal conversation on this plan, because this plan is disaster for Russia, political entourage. So it means they have to accept that the total idea of a special operation, a military operation in Ukraine, the total idea of trying to change something in Ukraine was a failure and was a bad idea. And it's not easy for them to sell this to the people in Russia. The problem is how to sell the situation in Ukraine, or any kind of resolution in Ukraine, as a victorious case to Russian people. And that's why, of course, they have to demonstrate some kind of territories being taken by Russia as a part of this deal. Crimea as minimum, and maybe possible something else, but they have to present to the people that all these losses, all these bad things for Russia during the last 8 years, they were not the waste of time and resources, but some kind of achievement. And this is the problem. So they have to find a way how to present the participation in this negotiation to the people with some kind of solution which is more or less attractive to the people and understandable to the people. Of course, the Kremlin, the Putin and his people are very professional in delivering any messages to the population. So they can deliver anything with some smell of victory in that. But nevertheless, they are very ambitious in the public demand for the territories of Ukraine to be moved to Russia. At the same time, they are not ready for any kind of leaving the territory of Ukraine at all. So we'll see. But nevertheless, I agree with General Breedlove that in any case, if they come to the table with their idea, and everybody at the table will put a point to them that there is no way to talk about your plan at all, your Russian plan. So it will be public, this public discussion would be helpful to push them in the next stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Mr. Bondarov, let me come to you with this question and maybe combine a couple questions that came in the chat about the Russian activists, politicians, former government employees being in exile outside of Russia. Do you think it's possible to bring Russia to negotiations table? What would be the circumstances for that? And you, as a part of that community in exile, do you think you have any role or power or weight to generate some sort of reaction to the war inside Russia?
Well, I believe that no calls for peace, no negotiation initiative can force anybody to this negotiation in goodwill, especially Mr. Putin. It doesn't work like that. Negotiations take place only when both parties see no alternative to achieve their goals. Today, President Putin sees that he can achieve whatever objectives he has in his imagination by force. He may every day tell himself that Russian troops are slowly, with heavy losses, but advancing on Ukraine. And the Western support for Ukraine is visibly getting less and less convincing. So he feels pretty safe. He holds initiative in his hands. He imposes his agenda on Ukraine and the West. He is not alone. I cannot agree with General Gavrilov. Russia is not alone. Russia is building this new axis with China, with DPRK, with Iran, with some other forces who are gloating over this indecisiveness by the Western countries. So why Putin would want to have negotiations? Only negotiations he agrees to is just to dictate his conditions and his will. So his conditions are unequivocally accepted. And we know his conditions. It is demilitarization of Ukraine, so total disarming of Ukraine, denazification, so change of political regime in Ukraine. So Ukraine becomes totally dependent on Russia and maybe finally incorporated into Russia or entirely. And of course, the West, the United States, first of all, must lift all sanctions imposed since 2014. So it will be this, as I mentioned, humiliation for the West in the eyes of the entire world.
Yeah.
So the entire world, the global South sees that the United States is the king, is a naked king, so to speak. Yeah, so the United States is no longer a superpower to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. And the United States administration is behaving very well to President Putin's expectations, I must admit. So I have a question really for the United States administration. What is the main restrictive factor for this indecisive policy? Whether it's nuclear factor or it is something else, or maybe they, as General Breedlove very rightly says, that the West needs a clear strategy and a clear set of goals. But to that end, first of all, the West must have a clear picture of what this war is to the West, whether it's a faraway brotherly conflict for territories, and then the West is naturally doesn't want to get itself involved, or this is the challenge by Putin to reshape political map, to change the world order, to overthrow the United States from the throne of the leading country in the world. And then the approach and address to this war must be different. And I'm being very short. Judging by the rhetoric, by the White House, for instance, I have an impression that they understand that this is a new kind of the beginning of the new world war, the war that is intended to reshape the political and economical map of the world. But judging by the actions, it seems that the United States still think that it's a very faraway conflict, which has no real importance to them. How does it coincide in one head? I don't understand, and that is why we see this not very, optimistic picture today.
So there was a question for you specifically about that. What would it take for Russia to take peace seriously? And are you saying that it's basically the Western involvement and this public and direct statement of Ukraine, of support for Ukraine?
Yeah, just like why and how President Kennedy was able to convince Nikita Khrushchev to withdraw missiles from Cuba by the direct threat of withdrawing them by himself, right? Mm. And then this threat, when Moscow realizes that they can get something bad for themselves. Because as I said, Putin feels safe in Moscow. Mm-hmm. Nobody bombs Moscow, really. Just a few drones do not count. understands that he is feared. His nuclear blackmail is taken too serious. So he has nothing to be afraid of. And he sees that he can manage this escalation. He can manage this level of fear for the United States and their allies. So he will be more flexible, so to speak, if he feels that he is no longer safe, if he feels that other people on the planet do possess nuclear weapons, that they have resolve and will to deal with him. As long as he doesn't feel it, as long as he doesn't see it, you will have no negotiation.
Thank you very much for that. And so we have 4 minutes left. That means that each of you gentlemen have about a minute for your closing remarks, which would be about the end game that we all talk about. 2020, sometimes in 2025, European capitals do talk about some sort of end game. And what do you think the end game would be? And it may be repeating some of what we already discussed, but to summarize this and bring the main topic of this conversation to a conclusion, please think about your responses, quick responses about where do you see this war in 2025? But before that, there was, I think, very important question coming in about the Black Sea and Turkey. And again, very briefly, General Breedlove, if you would, where do you see Turkey's role in all this? We mentioned Montreux Convention, Russia building a port in Georgia. So how do you think this is shaping up with Turkey's participation?
Well, what we have to give Turkey credit for is they are applying the Montreux Convention in a pretty level way. We would certainly like to be able to take more capability through the straits and into the Black Sea. But frankly, right now, I don't think we have the policy to do that. Remember that we withdrew our U.S. ships and other things when this all started. And we backed up and changed our flight patterns in the Black Sea when Russia went after one of our drones. And so I don't see a big reason right now to try to change Montreux because our policy would not allow us to take advantage of a change in Montreux. So as I understand it, they're doing a good job of also limiting Russian transit. And so that's a good thing. But, clearly we would like to see Turkey taking a more NATO position in the Black Sea in matters much bigger even than Montreux.
Well, thank you very much for that. And now this really quick round, we're out of time almost. So where to start with you, General Havrilov, what does an end game mean to you and to Ukraine?
We don't have a crystal ball for any situation in the world. Of course, you can't predict what is going to be next year or a year after that. But certainly, if you're doing your best, if you concentrate your efforts, if you're motivated, if your people are ready to fight, and you have a support, permanent support, and very open support and public support from your partners, inevitably, sooner or later, it will deliver results. And so we should concentrate on that. We should not just keep in doubt some kind of possible scenarios or just follow the rhetoric of Putin just to frighten us or something like that. The regime in Moscow, they're afraid of those who are not scared of them. That's why we should very ready to demonstrate them the readiness of Ukrainian society and army to continue fighting and demonstrate the resolveness of our partners, United States and NATO, to support Ukraine as long as necessary with this war and to do it public almost every day. And that is the worst scenario for Russia. And we will see how long it will take for them to keep the tempo of this war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Mr. Bondarev, what does the end game mean to you and therefore from your position? How do you see it?
Well, if it's in game in favor of Putin, then I think all Russian immigration will stay somewhere outside of Russia for as long as Putin stays in power. And I would like to just to stress that if Putin cannot win this war, but he can be allowed to win this war by weakening of Western assistance to Ukraine. And if this happens, so the main losers will be not only Ukraine but the West entirely, the Western community. And then we can expect many other hostile moves, like China moves against Taiwan, DPRK moves against South Korea, all under cover of the nuclear weapons, because everybody understands that if you have nuclear weapons, United States, despite all their political, economical, military might, are helpless. They cannot do anything about you. So you're free to do whatever you want. That's the future we are looking at now. I would like to I wish we would see some better future, but it takes much more than the West is showing right now.
Thank you very much. And General Breedlove, you get to say the last word of the meeting about the end game. And if maybe even if there's a possibility to sort of look at the wider region, what that end game would look like either way. For other countries that neighbor Russia, for example.
So I think that's very easy to tie to everything that's been said. If we go back to the very beginning of this last part of the war, because I remind people this war is almost 11 years old now, but this last 2.5 to 3 years, we were handed 2 documents by Mr. Putin. And if you remember what he said was, sign these or there will be other means. And we pretty soon learned after that what those other means were as he invaded Ukraine. And as much as we love and are fighting for and supporting our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, we remember from those 2 documents that this is bigger than Ukraine. Mr. Putin's goals are bigger than Ukraine. You are an expert in Georgia, and you know about the gray zone fight going on in Georgia right now, and Russia's fight to take over that country in a gray zone war. I talked not long ago to the Minister of Interior before she resigned because of Russian pressure of Moldova, and she described to me all of the actions happening in Moldova from Russia. So it's kinetic in Ukraine, and they are the epicenter of the fight right now. But Mr. Putin's intent is much bigger than Ukraine, and we have to stop that in Ukraine.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for this, and thank you to our audiences and all the questions that they sent. My apologies if I did not ask all of them, but we tried to concentrate on a specific topic of Ukraine's victory here. With that, I appreciate your time. It was a pleasure to see you on the screen here. Hopefully, we'll see each other in person again very soon. And Peter, are there any closing remarks you would like to make before we say goodbye?
I want to thank you all very, very much for participating. Special thanks to General Breedlove, General Havrilov, Ambassador Bandera for the quality of your remarks. I think this is about as comprehensive a conversation as we possibly could have had about war and peace, industry, society, and all of those features that go into the kind of systems confrontation that our rivals in the regimes in Moscow and Beijing, in Tehran, Pyongyang have seen. So thank you very much for all your remarks, and appreciate your time this morning, and all of those who chose to listen and attend. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.